Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. Each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry. Now, today we're lucky enough to have a remarkable guest joining us, John Milad, who is a life sciences venture capitalist and entrepreneur. Hello, John. Welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
No problem. How are you doing today?
Yeah, all's well. Thank you. Calling you from London.
Yeah, temperature's taken a bit of a dive, hasn't it, recently? So it feels like winter's really upon us at the moment. First of all, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us. We really appreciate it. Normally, in podcasts, people actually tell you about what your achievements have been, but I feel like it's more appropriate for you to tell us. So if you don't mind, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your journey that you've been on, please.
Great. Yeah, I'm very happy to share that. I know one thing that I've realized over the course of my journey is that everyone's journey is different, right? We all come from a different starting place. We all have different temperaments, and we all have to navigate a different set of circumstances. So I think it's often useful to hear about how people have approached things, just to build our fact set of the different ways of going through life. Well, I'm American originally. You can tell from my accent, I'm sure. Spent the first 25 years of my life growing up in the U.S. I was I grew up in New Hampshire, which is a small rural state. And so I was a country boy in a small village, hungry to get out and see the world. So I then left to go to the University of Chicago. And once I got my degree there, I went to go work on Wall Street. I was interested in understanding the world of finance and how big deals happen. And I was excited by the idea of working, with big companies around the world. I very quickly, through my journey at finance, figured out that finance gives you a set of tools to understand things, right? How to raise money, how to raise capital, how to value things. It also teaches you a lot of discipline in terms of working for an investment bank in the 90s was well known for very high expectations in terms of work ethic. So, really honed that for me as well. And then, I discovered that actually there are many different directions that could be taken in. And I developed a fascination for healthcare and healthcare innovation at that point. In particular, I love the idea that there was a meaningful intersection of business on the one hand with technology and science on the other, and then the practical application of improving healthcare and medicine. And that intersection, I just then formed the lifelong basis of my professional focus ever since. And I've taken that in three directions. I was initially an investment banker covering the sector. I came over to London and worked on a team that covered life sciences and healthcare in the UK and Europe, and doing fundraisings and M&A and oftentimes helping founders and entrepreneurs who created companies that were looking to IPO and list, looking to access capital, or looking to ultimately achieve an exit, right, to a larger strategic. And that helped me really understand the ecosystem and ways of thinking about and framing things, and also learn the landscape of the different players and how they think and how to talk to them. But I soon discovered that I wasn't fully satisfied with that intermediary role, and I wanted to have a hand in the actual shaping of things. So my next move was to go over to the buy side. Initially, I was with the family office in New York, and we did all kinds of stuff from venture studio stuff, creating businesses and launching them and funding them, to classical venture, stage investing in venture, and then buyouts and distressed deals. So it was really cool because it was a family office. It meant that there weren't a lot of formal constraints around the kinds of investments we could do. So we could just look at anything that we thought would make money. And so I learned there about how to look at things from the eyes of a principal, how to see opportunities for creating value and return. I did my first investment in health tech. So it was in the late 90s, and the dot-com boom was riding high, and I was the young guy in the fund. And so the gray-haired partners turned to me and said, "Oh, you're young, you understand this internet stuff. Why don't you go figure out some deals?" And so I did that. And one of the investments we did was in a precursor company that went on to become WebMD, and which of course is even today, over 25 years later, probably the largest medical portal in the world, and saw a good exit to KKR for about $3 billion. So that was when I whet my appetite for the health tech and life sciences sector as an investor. My next investment role was with Atlas Venture in London on the life sciences team. And that was very much biotech focused with some medtech. And through that, I started getting really close to some of the portfolio companies. And through that, was invited to step in to act as CFO for a German biotech company that was in the Atlas portfolio. And so I got to see what it was like actually in the trenches, amongst not just deployment of capital to make money, the actual creation of the thing that would create the value that underlies everything we're doing. And we had a specialty pharma product for treating rheumatoid arthritis. While I was there, we transitioned that from development to commercial stage. I led the process to raise a Series B funding round that gave the company the funding it needed to commence commercial activities. It was a really nice round that we raised. It was about 30 million, and with a nice multiple on the up round valuation. And then partnered the lead product with a European pharma, Menarini, and prepared the company for IPO. And I stepped out and brought in a local management team. And they went on to do their thing, which ended up being, they didn't do the IPO because the market shut down in 2008, but ended up merging with Horizon Therapeutics in the US, then gone on to very good outcome. From that, I stepped into a fund in London called NBGI Ventures, which is focused on Medtech. So that's where I really started to get even more specialized from, first generalist to healthcare and life sciences, and then to Medtech. And I was one of two partners who deployed the fund there, and made investments in diabetes area, structural heart, orthopedics, and some other, and then actually in dialysis as well. We'll get onto that. And some of those investments involve companies that have a big software component to their offering. So this was, this was around the 2008 to 2014 timeframe. So we were still, models were still emerging. Cloud was new, right? But what we were starting to see is opportunities for leveraging those tools to do things like better remote patient management. And so, one company I was involved in was called Cellnovo, which had an insulin pump, but also a whole cloud-based diabetes management platform for helping patients capture all the relevant data and report it back to their clinicians. And then where I really got deep was in Quanta, dialysis technologies, which I helped. So I worked with the founding technical team to spin the assets, the core technology, out of a parent company. So in the Midlands, there's a company called IMI PLC. It was a bit of an old school, like valves and pumps company, specialist engineering applications. And they had worked out this cartridge-based fluid management system, which for pumping and mixing fluids, which they had successfully applied in other industries like the beverage dispensing industry. And some of the team members had the idea that this could also be used in dialysis to make the devices smaller and easier to use. But IMI had no capability of developing a medical device. So we were able to work with them to spin the technology and the team out. And my fund, MBDI Ventures, co-led the Series A that created the company and funded it to go off and do the independent development of that technology into a product. And I joined the board as a founding non-exec and worked closely with the team from that point onwards. And after a few years, we saw that really outside the box, outsider thinking that allowed the team to come up with a solution that nobody else in the industry had ever been able to do. While that was a strength, it needed to be complemented with the discipline of the experience of actually developing a medical device and all the documentation and regulatory compliance and standards. So I was asked to step in to help guide that. So I became the CEO of that in 2014. Ran for 9 years. And from a technology concept to a version 1 of the product to clinical introduction to a next generation version that really ended up being the thing that we launched commercially. And along the way, built a really, really, really impressive team that was capable of designing and developing such a thing, blending internal capability with external capability, you mentioned software, right? So software is a big part of what we did. One, in terms of the embedded software to run the instrument, the capital equipment itself, and also the user interface and the GUI, but then also cloud-based and web-based applications for the digital health platform that sat above that, which collected information from multiple sources and integrated that. Basically lifted and automated and lifted the burden on patients and clinicians to have visibility on what was happening in real time across treatments. So it was quite an extensive lift. Basically involving almost every version of every discipline of like software development you can imagine, and obviously having to build an extensive tool set of the different elements that we put together to make that happen. So really interesting to get deep into that and to so we had a lot of interesting lessons learned there, which are interested we could talk about. But ultimately, this all resulted in a product that we successfully launched in the UK and the US. We got it through the FDA. We got a CE mark. We built up our production to be able to manufacture it, beyond just hand-built batches, and raised a significant amount of capital along the way, including the largest funding round ever in our industry in 2021. We took in about $250 million. And then following that, we got a bunch of awards for the innovation the engineering innovation and excellence that our product represented. So stuff like, industrial design of the year, electronics design of the year. I think what the team is most proud of was the Royal Academy of Engineering's Roberts Award, which is widely considered to be the Nobel Prize of Engineering. So lots of good things happened. To this day, the product is being used successfully at home in the UK and in hospital environments in the US. And the company continues to go. I stepped out summer of 22 and continues to build off its strengths, and recently reported completion of a home study in the US and some interesting expansions in the US. So now it's interesting to watch that story from a bit of a distance, and to not have to worry about that 24/7 as the person on the watch. And so that I came back. I thought I'd go back into venture. So I was trying to raise a venture fund earlier this year, but I very quickly learned that it's a terrible market to try to raise a new venture fund. So I've decided to listen to the market and not attempt to do something that's so counter-cyclical. And so I'm now working with a portfolio of companies, basically helping them to make use of my perspective as a company builder and as a financier to work with boards and management teams in the life sciences sector.
So if you don't mind me saying, that's quite an illustrious career that you've had so far. Have there been any particular highlights where you've really enjoyed and come out of a project and thought, what, that's probably the best that I've had in a long time?
Yeah, so there's different things from different times, right? Because you have to be able to look. This stuff is hard. I think it'd be very dishonest to just say it was all laughs and giggles and fun along the way. It is hard, and but what you do is you hope to have some moments where you can enjoy the view once you've done the hard work of climbing that hill. And I can remember several times like that. I can certainly remember as an investor having to take a view on what company are we going to back when there are multiple companies operating in the same field, and taking a deep dive to really understand the dynamics and the differentiation, and then maybe even having some views on ways to tweak the strategy, right? And then being able to influence that, and then having the good fortune of things working out in a way that's consistent with your initial thesis. That's very gratifying. Also to think, well, maybe I had a hand in shaping that in the right way. I certainly, loved the journey the whole journey at Quanta was amazing. We built it up from 30, people when I came in to about 300 when I left, and building that team and cultivating excellence. And I really enjoyed that whole process. And then seeing the product get shaped from something that was always innovative, but frankly early on, and necessarily so, quite a crude prototype, turning into something that's really polished and industry leading, and seeing that thing being created before your eyes, I just found tremendously gratifying. And that is only done by a team. Clearly, again, I think I can take some gratification in knowing I helped shape that, and of course, and directly and indirectly. So something I'm really proud of to say, that exists, that portable dialysis system now exists in the world, and something to do with that is super, super gratifying. And I have to say, just in the last year, as I was out trying to raise a new fund, what I really enjoyed was interacting with because part of when you're raising a fund, not only are you trying to go to investors who will give you money to invest, you need to simultaneously build a pipeline of to show those investors where you would put the money. And I really enjoyed going out and getting to know other entrepreneurs and management teams and hearing their stories, right? And being able to compare notes and tell war stories and maybe share a bit of perspective of what, for me worked and didn't work. I have to say that was probably the most gratifying part of what I've done over the last year, despite the fact we didn't succeed in raising the fund as intended. Just getting back out there and meeting a broad range of innovators and founders, learning about what they're trying to do and the problems they're solving, and being able to share some of my pattern recognition and experience, I just found to be tremendously rewarding.
Thank you for sharing that with us. So I think we can agree that being in the entrepreneurial field and investment banking, investment capitalism is not for the faint of heart. So you mentioned some of the gratifying things. Have you had any experiences that you've learned from where you thought, well, that was a really valuable lesson to learn, even if it was a hard one?
Yeah. So, look, there are times that are really hard, right? Things don't go your way. To an extent, you can try to mitigate that with good preparation, right? And contingency plans. But fundraising, for example, is always hard. And, while at my time, during my tenure at Quanta, we raised almost $400 million, which is a good raise, a good amount of capital by anyone's measure. That didn't all come in easy or at once. So there were long dry spells. And I have to tell you, that, after like the 100th investor has told you they're not going to give you money and you got to pick yourself back up and go find someone else or go back to someone that you spoke to previously who shot you down. That does get hard and dispiriting along the way. And you got to develop the resilience and the thick skin, because nobody wants to hear a management team just crying the blues, right? You've got to give them something that's fresh and compelling. So there were times when that was really hard. There were times when there were technical problems that we needed to solve where there wasn't an immediate or obvious solution, and so you just had to believe that there must somehow be a solution and to have a process of going about and searching for that. There were market access issues as well in terms of severe constraints on pricing. So there's all these problems you've always got to deal with and navigate. And at times they can be disheartening. Sometimes you're just doing something that's impossible. And I guess you got to learn. That's kind of where I got to with the fundraise this last year for my new venture fund, because the market's just not interested right now in a new manager with a new story. And in an environment where LPs, those are the people who invest in venture funds, are actually looking to reduce their exposure and reducing the number of managers that they're backing, like showing up as the new guy and say, hey, here's what you should do. You should put more money to work in somebody you don't know. That's just you have to know how to read the room sometimes. And my read of the room or the market was, hey, this is not the time to be doing that. And so there's something about being okay with trying something that's a bit audacious or bold and accepting that because it's not easy or because that you might not succeed, and then listening to the signals and deciding, is it because I need to tweak something and go at it again, or am I better? Have I learned something that tells me this is just not going to be a productive avenue to pursue, right? And that's a tough one to judge. But once you figure that out to your satisfaction, I think there's a comfort in that, right? Which is, okay, I wasn't stupid for trying that. It was reasonable to give it a try because there are some unknowns that I just wouldn't be able to flip those cards over to know unless I try. Then once you flip those cards over, you know what they're telling you, that you've got to use that information, right? And if that information might hint at what a viable solution looks like, or it might just be telling you this is just not the direction to go in right now.
Yeah, I imagine, like you said, now is a particularly hard time. I think the change in the environment, the political, economic, cultural, societal environment has changed a lot over the past 3 or 4 years. You mentioned reading the room, and to some extent, have you ever been able to successfully predict the way that markets will go or the way that political winds will blow, or is it something that you just have to adapt to on the fly?
I would say that educated and experienced people can, with a high degree of confidence, make general predictions about markets. Like when times are really frothy and riding high, it's fairly obvious that that won't last forever and there will be a correction. And then when you're in the correction, it should be obvious that at some point you will reach the nadir and there's always a regression to the mean, right? So the thing that's hard is not that general direction of travel, but the timing. I think somebody said, while it's great to keep an eye on the long-term opportunity, if you can't stay alive in the short term, you won't be around to benefit from that, right? So that's where it can get hard, is when depending on a change happening, nobody knows the timing of that. It's very hard. I mean, in hindsight, these things are maybe obvious, but looking forward, they're very murky. And so, I think it's almost foolhardy to have a plan that relies on the world changing. I think you work with the circumstances you have and with an awareness that things probably won't always be the same, and that you do the best you can. Yeah, I certainly would not claim to have a crystal ball. I know I lived through the 2008, financial crisis, and in our world, which was venture and like Medtech, it was like a 5-year nuclear winter, right? Tough. It's not always that hard or that long, but there's probably make some general association that the bigger the highs, and probably the bigger the lows will be, right?
Yeah, it does make some kind of logical sense, doesn't it? In terms of like venture capitalism, what kind of qualities do you have, or should someone have, in order to be able to be successful in that particular field?
In venture, there are a few things, right? So we break it down to a process flow. Like, what do you need to do to be successful in venture? You need to find opportunities, right? So you need to have a front end of the funnel where there's lots of things coming in. So you have the highest probability of finding the good stuff, right? Because not everything is worth doing within your defined area of investment. So I guess I back it up. You need to have a formulated strategy that makes sense. But most people in venture funds aren't actually formulating the strategies. They kind of raise the fund on a strategy. So then the next step is executing the strategy. And that's where you've got to build the front end of the funnel, like set yourself up in a way that isn't many opportunities that are relevant are coming to you, right? So you can pick and choose. And oftentimes, kind of venture investing that I did, which is life sciences, not seed stage, but like early and late stage, you might just do 2 or 3 investments a year, and you're going to look at like 500 to 1,000, right? That's the kind of funnel you need to set up. So you need to set things up so that you're seeing all that. The next thing is you need to be able to triage it in some way. So you need to be able to have some efficient way of deciding like what really is worth focusing your time on and not. And then you need to be able to dig deep into those to pick the winners, right? So that's kind of and then when you've made the negotiate the investment and then manage it. So you think through the things that are needed to do that. One is early on, there's a kind of like, I call it social promiscuity that's needed, intellectual promiscuity that's needed to just get out there, right? And be known and to find the relevant set of opportunities and make sure that you have the opportunity to consider them. So that's almost like a social skill that's needed, right? Combined with, I think the only way to do that without going crazy is to have a high level of intellectual curiosity. So to be genuinely interested in seeing what's out there, combined with a propensity to be able to network and interact with people to find those things. Then that flips to once you kind of got that in your radar, you then need to process those and evaluate them. Then you need the ability to direct your energy to then go from like a very wide sort of radar to a focused beam of light, right? That can just drill down on that company and that technology and that need that they're trying to address. So the ability to repeatedly start to drill down and go deeper in multiple different subject areas, because rarely, oftentimes people in life sciences venture will have a PhD. But, there are very few deals that are specifically playing to their PhD thesis, right? So you need the ability to go into multiple areas, that sort of intellectual flex versatility. It's some sort of tool set to do that conceptually, right? To then start mining those multiple areas to make a really good informed decision about, is this something that worth doing? So again, I guess that has to do with an intellectual adaptability, versatility, curiosity, and just kind of a kind of resilience, just to put in the hard work of just digging, right? And being able to talk to a variety of subject matter experts who are relevant to that. So then you need some good business sense around structuring and managing the investment. Like how do you frame and articulate an investment case that's going to make sense, right? That's going to generate return for you given the risks and all that. So there's just some sort of business sense that's needed there as well, combined with the ability to negotiate, right, and get to a deal that makes sense. And then there's the bit about typically a venture investor will go on the board of a company and then work with the management teams. So that's where having some venture capitalists are quite privileged in that they see hundreds of companies a year. They'll have dozens of companies in their portfolio, and the individual venture capitalist might be on half a dozen, maybe a dozen boards. So you get a very broad pattern recognition of like, what are the common problems to companies as they progress from one stage to the next, as they try to scale. If you're thematically investing in a sector, what are the common regulatory barriers, IP issues? You will just generate a really rich set of I call it pattern recognition around that actually be very hard for an individual manager in a company to get. What they're good at is going really deep in their little area of subject matter, but they don't get the advantage of that breadth of experience, right? And so that's, so again, if somebody's curious and really wants to cultivate expertise, as a venture investor, they have a really privileged opportunity to do that because of, where they sit in the ecosystem. And then to be able to give that back, to apply that knowledge to the portfolio companies, to be a good partner to the founders and the management teams, to help them, navigate. Because look, nobody ever became a founder or a manager of a startup who didn't want that to win, but they just don't always have the full set of skills or lived experience, right? And that's where a good VC can really be a strong partner and mentor. So, I think does that answer your question in terms of?
It does really in depth. Yeah. Thank you. So, John, what was it about the life sciences in particular that drew your attention, or you found particularly exciting when it comes to venture capitalism?
Well, it was the intersection of the fact that healthcare is a huge industry. Yeah, it's something like 20% of the GDP in the US, for example, right? So where there's a huge industry, there's an opportunity to make lots of money, right? And so in business, you want to make sure you're going after things that can, like where commercially you'll be rewarded for your efforts, right? One, but that's not sufficient. So the second thing is I've always been fascinated by science and medicine. My own personal trajectory was I actually didn't end up focusing on that in terms of my university degree. But there's like an alternate reality where I could have, because I was always interested in it, but I just happened to go in another direction. I ended up studying political science and in particular international relations, and that also fascinated me for its own reasons. In fact, in 1994 I wrote my senior thesis was on the global warming and the role of carbon emissions in that, and the challenge of regulating it. And I predicted that would be extremely difficult to achieve, which unfortunately time has proven to be correct. So I'm not particularly proud of that insight, but it nonetheless was correct. But anyway, going back on topic, I've always been fascinated by that. And I've read scientific journals, and I took university level science classes. So maybe not good enough to be a scientist myself, who's on the frontier of knowledge, pushing the boundary, but certainly a deep interest in watching from the sidelines, right, and understanding where we are. And so working in the life sciences and healthcare gives me an opportunity to really be involved in that subject matter, to think about then how that can be deployed to do the third thing, which is to innovate and bring to market solutions that solve problems. We have so many. Nobody lives forever. Most people, even in wealthy nations, especially in wealthy nations, have serious issues around quality of life toward the latter stages, toward the latter end of their lives. And then we've got all kinds of issues with health inequality and all that. So lots of problems to be solved. We are not like at the point where we're chasing some tiny diminishing return in healthcare. We've got big problems that need solving. And so it's worth doing. It's intellectually satisfying and it's financially rewarding. That to me is the like ideal trifecta of how I want to spend my life.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's fascinating to hear your perspective on that. And when you say these things, it is actually something that you think you already know, but when you hear it spelled out like the way you spell it out, it does heighten a sense of urgency around it. Now we are getting close for time, unfortunately. So I do like to ask one final question just before we come to the end regarding like venture capitalism and entrepreneurship. If there's someone out there now watching this video who's maybe in the early stages of thinking they want to set up a career, or they want to be an entrepreneur of some sort, they want to be a venture capitalist, what advice would you give to someone like that?
Always bear in mind, start from the end and work backwards. So people often start from the beginning, which is I have this technology innovation, right? It's the old, solution looking for a problem. Encourage, any entrepreneur to imagine a narrative that starts with the end. Like, what does success look like for you? What are going to be the drivers that allow that to happen? Why would a customer, why would a user care about your solution? What problem are you solving for them other than, hey, it's a neat technology? And in healthcare, you always need to connect that with, and how am I going to navigate the complex pathway IP? Like, you have to be able to protect it, or at least not have someone else stop you from doing that with their patents. Regulatory, how am I going to get this through a regulator? Right? And what are the things I need to show them? What are the claims I want to make that will allow me to pursue the right commercial strategy? And then ultimately, how is this going to get paid? Who's paying for this, right? Because you're typically selling to some sort of provider, but that provider is relying on some reimbursement system to get paid themselves. Like, how are you connecting with that? And so I just encourage that kind of thinking, like, not just, here's like, I don't know, a clinical problem that maybe I'm solving with an interesting technology. It's how are you going to then connect that with all the other elements that are necessary? Technology, clinical problem, IP, regulatory path, reimbursement, commercial value proposition. Those are all necessary to have something that's successful. And oftentimes, entrepreneurs and innovators are, and very much rightly so, enamored with the science and the technology piece. But you also need to understand those other pieces to have something that's viable. And once you can tell that story, then you should be able to raise money. And then you will, if you execute on your plan, you have a good chance of getting to a good outcome.
John, that's perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your advice and some amazing expertise that you have. So just want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with us today, John. It was been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Barry. I enjoyed it.
Lovely. That was John Milad, who is a life sciences venture capitalist and entrepreneur.